Tell me this isn't true." The words echoed through the royal council chamber before the great assembly had even begun. Alpha King Lucian Dreadmore looked up from the treaty resting in his hands. Across the room, his oldest advisor stood frozen. "The council has already voted, Your Majesty." Lucian's jaw tightened. There has to be another way. There isn't. The Eastern Kingdom will only sign the peace accord if Princess Seraphine Valmont is formally recognized as your ceremonial Luna. Silence settled over the chamber. Lucian closed his eyes. 20 years of war, thousands of lives lost, entire villages burned. One signature could finally end it. One signature would cost him the woman he loved. The grand hall overflowed with rulers from 12 kingdoms before noon. Kings, queens, ambassadors, generals. Every seat beneath the towering crystal chandeliers had been filled. Outside, thousands of citizens waited to hear whether peace had finally come to the continent. Inside, only one decision mattered. At the center of the hall sat Princess Seraphine Valmont. She looked as uncomfortable as everyone else. She had never asked to become part of another woman's marriage. Beside the throne stood Luna Aurelia Everwinter, graceful, elegant. The silver moon crown rested lightly upon her dark hair. For 10 years, she had stood beside Lucian through famine, rebellion, harsh winters, and impossible negotiations. To the people, she wasn't simply their Luna, she was the quiet heart of the kingdom. The royal chancellor stepped forward. "The treaty has one final condition." His voice carried through the silent hall. "To unite the bloodlines of both kingdoms and guarantee lasting peace, Alpha King Lucian Dreadmore shall accept Princess Seraphine Valmont as his ceremonial Luna." No one moved. The chancellor continued. "Luna Aurelia Everwinter shall retain her title, her residence, her privileges, her honors. Nothing else shall change." A bitter silence answered him. Everyone present understood the lie. Titles remained, places did not. Lucian slowly rose from his throne. His hands felt impossibly heavy. He searched the hall until his eyes found Aurelia. She looked at him with the same gentle expression she always had. No anger, no fear, only quiet patience. His heart broke. "Aurelia," his voice nearly failed him. "The kingdom needs this sacrifice." The words hung in the air like a sentence already passed. No one breathed. Several noble women lowered their eyes. Even Seraphine looked ashamed. Everyone waited. Surely the Luna would protest. Surely she would remind the king of the vows they had exchanged beneath the moon temple. Surely she would fight for the marriage they had spent a decade building. Instead, Aurelia smiled. It was warm, beautiful, and strangely peaceful. She reached up with both hands, slowly lifted the silver moon crown from her head. The soft scrape of metal echoed through the silent hall. She walked toward Lucian. Each step was unhurried. Every eye followed her. When she reached the throne, she carefully placed the moon crown into his hands. Her fingers lingered against the cool silver for only a heartbeat. Then she looked into his eyes. "If my place can be replaced," her voice remained calm. "It was never mine to begin with." Lucian felt the weight of the crown settle into his palms. It had never seemed so heavy. Aurelia stepped back, then bowed with flawless royal grace. No accusations, no tears, no desperate pleas, only dignity. When she straightened, she turned toward Princess Seraphine. "I sincerely hope your arrival brings the peace our people deserve." Seraphine's eyes immediately filled with tears. "I'm so sorry." Aurelia simply smiled again. "This was never your burden to carry." She turned once more, walked slowly through the center of the grand hall. The enormous doors opened before her. Sunlight poured across the polished marble floor. Without looking back, she disappeared beyond them. The hall remained utterly silent. Only one person moved. The oldest palace steward quietly lowered his head. He had served 3 generations of Alpha Kings. He had witnessed victories, coronations, funerals. He recognized that smile. It was not the smile of a woman accepting her fate. It was the smile of someone who had already decided she would never return. That evening, the palace celebrated peace. Musicians filled the banquet hall with triumphant songs. Nobles toasted the treaty that had ended 20 years of war. Outside the great windows, fireworks painted the night sky in silver and gold. Only one person did not attend. Aurelia Everwinter quietly walked through the palace she had called home for 10 years. She began in the orphan school. The children had already gone to sleep. Moonlight spilled through the windows onto rows of tiny wooden beds. She paused beside each one, gently pulling blankets over little shoulders that had kicked them away during sleep. On the teacher's desk, she left a small leather pouch filled with gold coins, enough to buy books for another year. Next came the healer's library. She carefully returned every borrowed journal to its shelf. Inside the front cover of her favorite medical text, she tucked several pages of handwritten notes containing remedies she had never found in any official record. Perhaps another healer would one day need them. From there, she walked into the royal kitchens. The night cooks looked up in surprise. "Your Majesty?" Aurelia smiled warmly. "I came to thank you." The oldest baker frowned. "For what?" "For making sure no servant ever went hungry after long winter shifts." The woman blinked in confusion. "How did you know?" Aurelia only smiled. "I tried very hard to know everyone." She embraced the elderly baker before quietly leaving. The palace guards received the same farewell. Every one of them. She thanked each soldier by name. She remembered whose daughter had recovered from illness, whose wife had opened a tailor's shop, whose son dreamed of becoming a physician instead of a warrior. Several guards watched her disappear down the corridor with puzzled expressions. It felt strangely like goodbye. Near midnight, Aurelia entered the royal gardens. She stopped beneath the ancient willow tree, where Lucian had first confessed he loved her. She remembered laughing, because he had rehearsed his speech so many times that he accidentally proposed before saying he loved her. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to cry. Only for a brief moment. Then she wiped away every tear. By the time she returned to the Luna Wing, her face was calm once more. Her traveling case remained almost empty. She packed only what had belonged to her before becoming Luna. A simple blue cloak, a worn journal, a silver hairbrush that had belonged to her mother. Everything else remained: the royal gowns, the jewels, the ceremonial robes, even the gifts Lucian had given her over the years. She touched each one only once before closing the wardrobe forever. At her writing desk, she unfolded a sheet of cream-colored paper. After several long minutes, she wrote only 2 sentences. "Don't search for me. Search for the woman I stopped being while trying to become the Luna everyone wanted." She folded the letter carefully, then placed it beside the empty stand where the moon crown had rested for so many years. Just before dawn, an elderly maid encountered Aurelia, walking toward the palace gates. "Your Majesty," the woman said with a smile, "you're awake early. I couldn't sleep. Shall I prepare breakfast?" Aurelia gently shook her head. "No, thank you. You've already taken wonderful care of me." Before the maid could answer, Aurelia embraced her. It was unexpected, tender, final. Moments later, the palace gates quietly closed behind her. No guards stopped her. No servants questioned her. By sunrise, she had vanished. When Lucian entered the Luna Wing later that morning, an uneasy silence greeted him. The room looked untouched, immaculate, almost sacred. Her gowns remained. Her jewelry remained. Her perfumes rested exactly where she had left them. Only Aurelia was gone. He found the letter beside the empty crown stand. He read it once, then again. His hands began to tremble. "Seal every border," he ordered. "Search every road, every port, every mountain pass." Captain Aldrin bowed immediately. "At once, Your Majesty." The search lasted for months. Not a single witness could say where Aurelia Everwinter had gone. It was as though the woman who had spent 10 years holding an entire kingdom together had quietly stepped into the dawn and simply disappeared. The first year after Aurelia disappeared, almost no one noticed the difference. The peace treaty succeeded exactly as the Royal Council had promised. Trade with the Eastern Kingdom flourished. The borders grew quiet. For the first time in 2 decades, children fell asleep without hearing news of another battle. The council praised its own wisdom. The sacrifice was unfortunate, Chancellor Hadrian declared during one assembly, but necessary. The kingdom has never been stronger. Lucian wanted to believe him. He buried himself in work. He attended council meetings from dawn until well after sunset. He signed treaties, reviewed military reports, visited villages damaged by the long years of war. 6 months after Aurelia's departure, he fulfilled the final condition of the treaty and married Princess Seraphine Valmont. The ceremony was respectful, dignified, and strangely quiet. Seraphine wore the ceremonial robes expected of her new position, yet she never asked for Aurelia's old chambers. Instead, she chose a smaller residence overlooking the eastern gardens. When a lady-in-waiting addressed her as Her Majesty, the Luna, Seraphine gently corrected her. "I am here to keep peace, not to replace someone." Lucian heard about the exchange later that evening. For the first time in months, guilt settled heavily upon his chest. Seraphine had never wanted another woman's place, yet Aurelia had been the one forced to surrender it. By the 2nd year, small cracks began appearing throughout the kingdom. The royal orphanages requested emergency funding. Their grain reserves had unexpectedly run low. Lucian approved additional support immediately. Weeks later, the capital hospital reported severe shortages of medicines. Again, he authorized more funds. Then merchants from the northern provinces complained that long-standing trade agreements had quietly collapsed. Next came the village schools. Several closed because donations had stopped arriving. One by one, problems surfaced that no one had anticipated. None were large enough to threaten the kingdom alone. Together, they formed a pattern no one could explain. During one particularly frustrating council meeting, Lucian struck the table with his palm. "Why is every department failing at once?" Silence answered him. Even the ministers looked confused. Finally, the oldest palace steward stepped forward. "If Your Majesty permits, I believe I know where to begin." The following morning, he arrived carrying 6 enormous ledgers coated in dust. He placed them before the king. These belonged to Queen Aurelia. Lucian frowned. Financial records? More than that. The steward carefully opened the first ledger. Every page contained detailed notes written in Aurelia's elegant handwriting. Scholarship funds for village children, emergency grain reserves for harsh winters, private donations to orphanages, medical supply routes, marriage mediation between rival packs, loans quietly forgiven for struggling farmers, disaster relief plans, widows' pensions, hospice funding. Every few pages appeared another note. Personally verified, visited in person, needs additional support before winter. Lucian stared in disbelief. These were never presented to the council. They weren't meant to be. The steward's voice remained calm. Her Majesty believed kindness worked best when it wasn't announced. He opened another ledger. trade negotiations, peace agreements between neighboring pacts, apprenticeship programs, new irrigation systems, small village bridges repaired using Aurelia's private inheritance. Lucian turned page after page. Each revealed another responsibility she had quietly carried, another burden no one realized she had been lifting. Finally, he whispered, "How many people knew?" The steward looked down. "Almost no one. She asked us never to speak of it." Lucian leaned back in his chair. A painful truth settled over him. He had spent years believing Aurelia's greatest duty had been standing beside the throne. In reality, she had been holding up everything beyond it. He had not simply lost his Luna. He had unknowingly removed the heart that kept the kingdom alive. 7 years passed. The kingdom survived, but it never truly flourished again. Then, in the 7th winter, a deadly plague swept across the continent. Kingdom after kingdom closed its gates. Trade collapsed. Hospitals overflowed. Food became scarce. Only one place remained untouched, an independent sanctuary city known as Ilarion. Its hospitals never closed. Its harvests never failed. Its gates welcomed every suffering soul. And everywhere the same name was spoken with reverence. The White Queen. The plague did what decades of war never could. It humbled kings. Within months, the sickness spread across the continent like a relentless winter. Villages emptied. Markets closed. Entire trade routes disappeared beneath abandoned wagons and quarantine barriers. Even the wealthiest kingdoms found themselves powerless. Royal physicians exhausted every known remedy. Herbal medicines failed. Ancient healing rituals failed. Even wolves with extraordinary healing abilities succumbed to the fever. The illness showed no mercy. Rich and poor, king and servant, warrior and child. It claimed them all. Every morning brought another list of the dead. Every evening brought another kingdom requesting aid. Lucian refused to close his borders. Instead, he ordered grain stores opened and healers dispatched wherever they were needed. It wasn't enough. "We're losing too many people," the chief physician admitted one sleepless night. "Our hospitals are beyond capacity." "What about neighboring kingdoms?" "They're asking us the same question." Silence settled over the council chamber. For the first time in years, no one had an answer. Then came the rumors. At first, they sounded impossible. There is one city where no one dies from the plague. Travelers repeated the story so often that even the council began listening. They never refuse the sick. They ask for no payment. They feed anyone who arrives. They've never closed their gates. The city had a name, Ilarion. No armies protected it. No towering fortress surrounded it. Yet refugees crossed dangerous mountains simply for the chance to reach its white stone walls. When Lucian sent trusted scouts to investigate, they returned with astonishing reports. The stories are true. The hospitals are unlike anything we've ever seen. They separate patients before infection spreads. They keep detailed medical records. They've developed treatments our physicians have never imagined. Another scout added, "The harvest fields are managed by volunteers. No family goes hungry. Everyone works according to their ability. And everyone eats." The royal council stared in disbelief. "Who governs such a place?" the chancellor asked. The scout answered with quiet admiration. "A woman. They call her the White Queen." Desperation left little room for pride. Within days, every Alpha King accepted the same invitation. Travel to Ilarion. Request assistance, not demand, request. It was the first time in generations that rival rulers journeyed together without armies. When they reached Ilarion, silence greeted them. There were no guards pointing weapons, no frightened citizens hiding indoors. Instead, doctors hurried between hospitals, children carried baskets of bread to recovering patients, farmers unloaded fresh vegetables into community kitchens. The entire city moved with calm purpose. No one seemed afraid. An elderly nurse welcomed the rulers with a warm smile. "You've traveled a long way." "We have," Lucian replied. "We've come to seek the White Queen." She nodded. "Then please follow me." The rulers were led through broad stone streets, lined with flowering trees, until they reached a magnificent cathedral, built entirely of white marble. Its enormous doors stood closed. Above them was carved a single sentence: "Compassion is the strongest kingdom." The words lingered in Lucian's mind. The doors slowly opened. Sunlight streamed into the cathedral. Every conversation ceased. A single woman walked forward, wearing simple white robes. No crown rested upon her head. No jewels decorated her clothing. Yet the room instinctively stood. Not because protocol demanded it, because respect did. Lucian's breath caught. 7 years had changed her. Aurelia's hair was longer. Her face carried the quiet confidence of someone who had long ago stopped searching for approval. There was peace in her eyes, the kind of peace that only comes from knowing exactly who you are. She stopped before the gathered rulers. Her smile was gentle, unhurried, entirely free of bitterness. "Welcome to Ilarion." Her voice was as calm as he remembered. "I hope your journey was safe." Lucian could barely breathe. He had imagined finding Aurelia 1,000 different ways: alone, heartbroken, waiting. Instead, he had found a woman who no longer needed saving, a woman who had built something no king had ever managed to create. Around him, every Alpha King slowly lowered their heads in respect. Lucian did the same. Because before them stood no forgotten Luna. She was the White Queen. And somehow, she had become greater without the crown he once believed she needed. No one spoke. The silence inside Ilarion's great cathedral carried a different weight than the silence of royal courts. There was no fear in it. No politics, no calculation, only respect. Aurelia stood before 12 Alpha Kings without a crown upon her head. She wore simple white robes tied with a woven silver cord. Her hands bore faint scars from years of tending the sick. The rulers gathered before her wore gold, jewels, and ceremonial armor. Yet somehow they looked far less powerful. An elderly healer approached Aurelia carrying a basket filled with medicine. "Your Grace," she said softly, "the children's ward is ready." Aurelia smiled. "I'll be there shortly." The woman bowed, not out of obligation, but affection, and quietly departed. Lucian noticed something immediately. No one in Ilarion called her Your Majesty. No one addressed her as Queen. To every person in the city, she was simply the one who served first. The Chancellor of the Northern Realm stepped forward. He removed his ceremonial sword and placed it upon the marble floor. "My kingdom has lost nearly 40,000 people. Our physicians have failed." He slowly lowered himself onto one knee. "I humbly ask for your guidance." The cathedral remained still. Aurelia walked toward him herself. Instead of accepting the gesture, she gently offered him her hand. "Please stand. We kneel only to lift others." The Chancellor looked at her in astonishment before rising. One by one, the remaining rulers stepped forward. The King of the Western Isles, the Alpha Queen of Frosthaven, the High Lord of the Southern clans. Each bowed. Each asked for help rather than demanding it. Each received the same answer: Ilarion will help. No kingdom will be turned away. Finally, only Lucian remained standing. 7 years of regret settled heavily upon his shoulders. He took one slow step forward, then another. The marble floor seemed endless beneath his feet. When he reached Aurelia, he removed the royal mantle from his shoulders. Without speaking, he lowered himself onto one knee. The entire cathedral watched, not because an Alpha King had knelt, because he knelt before the woman he had once asked to surrender her place. His voice was barely above a whisper. "I came hoping to bring my Luna home." Aurelia looked at him with the same gentle kindness she offered every patient who entered her city. "I was never lost." The words carried no accusation, only truth. Lucien lowered his eyes. "I know. I should have understood that long ago." He swallowed hard. "I came to ask your forgiveness." She studied him quietly for several moments, then smiled. "You already have it." Hope flickered across his face. Perhaps there was still a path back. Then Aurelia continued. "Forgiveness isn't the same as returning." The hope faded, not replaced by anger, but by understanding. She knelt before him so they stood at the same height. "I forgave you years ago." Holding hatred only poisons the person carrying it. He searched her eyes. "Then why can't you come home?" She glanced through the cathedral doors toward the busy streets beyond. Children hurried beside nurses carrying fresh bread. Volunteers pushed carts of medicine toward the hospital. An old farmer laughed as young apprentices harvested vegetables from the community gardens. "This is my home." She turned back to him. "It has been for a long time." Lucien followed her gaze. Only then did he truly see it. Ilarion wasn't extraordinary because of its buildings, or its hospitals, or its harvests. It was extraordinary because the woman who had once quietly cared for one kingdom now cared for the entire continent. He slowly rose to his feet. For the first time in 7 years, he stopped asking himself how to bring Aurelia back. Instead, he began wondering how he could become worthy of everything she had built without him. Lucien did not leave Ilarion the next morning, nor the morning after that. The other Alpha Kings returned to their kingdoms carrying wagons filled with medicine, grain, medical journals, and healers trained by Ilarion's physicians. Lucien remained behind. He told his council he wished to understand how one independent city had accomplished what 12 kingdoms could not. In truth, he wanted to understand Aurelia, not the Luna he had lost, the woman she had become. His first morning began before sunrise. Unable to sleep, Lucien walked through the quiet streets, expecting to find the city still resting. Instead, lanterns already glowed in nearly every window. The bakeries had begun preparing bread. The healers were changing bandages before the day's patients awoke. Farmers were loading vegetables onto wagons destined for the hospitals. Near the largest infirmary, Lucien spotted Aurelia. She wasn't issuing orders. She wasn't standing on a balcony directing others. She was carrying buckets of fresh water beside a young volunteer who couldn't have been older than 15. The teenager smiled sheepishly. "I told Her Grace I could manage." "You could," Aurelia replied warmly. "But we'd finish twice as fast together." Lucien watched in silence. No one seemed surprised to see their queen doing ordinary work. It was simply who she was. Later that morning, he followed her into the children's ward. The room held dozens of beds. Some children were recovering from the plague. Others had lost parents and had nowhere else to go. The moment Aurelia entered, the room brightened. "Good morning, Your Grace." A little boy waved enthusiastically, despite having one arm wrapped in bandages. She laughed. "Someone looks much stronger today. I ate all my soup." "I heard. So today..." She reached into her apron pocket and produced a small carved wooden wolf. "I think you've earned this." The boy's face lit up. "You remembered." "I remember all my promises." She moved from bed to bed. She knew every child's name, every birthday. Which girl feared thunderstorms? Which boy refused bitter medicine unless it was mixed with honey? Lucian stood quietly in the doorway. He had once believed leadership meant commanding thousands. Aurelia somehow led one person at a time. That afternoon, they visited the community kitchens. Volunteers served meals beside merchants, scholars, and farmers. No one ate separately because of rank. Aurelia accepted the same bowl of vegetable stew as everyone else and carried her tray to an elderly widow sitting alone. "May I join you?" The woman smiled. "I was hoping you would." Lucian accepted his own meal and sat nearby. The widow noticed him. "So you're the Alpha King?" "I am." She nodded thoughtfully. "She speaks kindly of you." His spoon stopped halfway to his mouth. "She does?" "Oh yes. Whenever young couples ask if love is always easy, she tells them that good people sometimes make painful mistakes." Lucian lowered his eyes. Even here, she had protected his dignity. In the following days, he learned more than years of council meetings had ever taught him. Ilarion's hospitals shared knowledge freely instead of selling it. Its farmers stored surplus harvests for neighboring regions before filling their own markets. Every child, whether born to nobles or laborers, attended the same schools. When disputes arose, the first question asked was never, "Who is right?" It was, "Who needs help?" One evening, as they walked through fields of white lilies overlooking the city, Lucian finally spoke the question that had haunted him. "I used to think," he hesitated. "I believed leaving the palace made you smaller." Aurelia smiled gently. "I know. I couldn't have been more wrong." She looked toward the city below, where lanterns glowed like stars across the hillsides. "You didn't make me greater by letting me go. You simply stopped asking me to become someone I wasn't." He frowned. "I don't understand." She turned toward him. "I spent 10 years trying to become the perfect Luna, the woman who never disappointed anyone, the woman who smiled even when she was exhausted, the woman who quietly carried burdens so no one else had to." She paused. "When I arrived in Ilarion, no one asked me to become anything. They simply asked whether I was willing to help, and for the first time, I was allowed to be myself." The words settled deeply inside him. "You don't belong to me anymore," he said quietly. Aurelia shook her head. "I never truly did. I walked beside you. I was never meant to stand behind you." Lucian looked across Ilarion one last time. Children laughed in the courtyards. Doctors hurried between hospitals. Farmers returned home beneath the evening sky. Everywhere he looked, people smiled when Aurelia passed, not because she ruled them, but because she had served them. At last, he understood why no one here called her Your Majesty. Titles inspired obedience. Her life inspired devotion. And for the first time since the day she handed back her crown, Lucian stopped mourning the queen he had lost. He began admiring the woman the world had found. Lucian knew the time had come to leave. His council had sent 3 letters reminding him that his own kingdom needed its king. The plague had begun to retreat, thanks in large part to the physicians trained in Ilarion. Hospitals were no longer overflowing. Trade routes had cautiously reopened. Hope, fragile but unmistakable, had returned. Yet every morning, Lucian found another reason to remain. Another ward to visit. Another lesson to learn. Another conversation with Aurelia that quietly reshaped everything he believed about leadership. On his final evening in Ilarion, Aurelia invited him to walk beyond the city walls. They followed a narrow path overlooking rolling fields where volunteers harvested grain beneath the golden light of sunset. Children laughed in the distance, while healers packed wagons with medicine destined for neighboring kingdoms. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. The silence no longer felt painful. It felt earned, Lucian finally broke it. "I've been afraid to ask you something." Aurelia smiled gently. "Then ask." He stopped walking. "If I had chosen differently," his voice caught. "If I had refused the counsel. If I had protected our marriage instead of sacrificing it." And he struggled to meet her eyes. Would we still be together? The wind carried the scent of wheat across the hillside. Aurelia did not answer immediately. She looked toward Ilarion, where white buildings glowed beneath the evening sky. "I've asked myself that question too," she admitted. Lucian looked at her in surprise. "You have?" "Many times." She folded her hands before her. "I think," she smiled sadly, "maybe." Hope flickered inside him for the briefest moment. Then she continued. "But if that had happened," she pointed toward the city below, "the children's hospital wouldn't exist." Lucian followed her gaze. The widow's village would still be abandoned. The schools we built after the famine would never have opened. The healers who crossed borders during the plague would never have been trained. She turned toward him again, and thousands of people would have faced the darkest years of their lives without anyone waiting for them. Lucian closed his eyes. The truth hurt, not because she blamed him, because she didn't. "Our ending became someone else's beginning," she said softly. "I've made peace with that." He nodded slowly. "So have I." For the first time, he realized those words were true. He no longer wished to undo the past. He only wished he had become this version of himself much sooner. "I owe you more than an apology," he said. "You owe me nothing." "I do." He smiled faintly. "You taught me that a kingdom isn't held together by laws. It's held together by people who quietly care for one another when no one is watching." Aurelia laughed softly. "I learned that from an old village healer. She used to say that kindness grows best when no one is counting. I've never forgotten it." The sun dipped lower. Its golden light bathed the fields surrounding Ilarion. Lucian reached into his coat and removed the small velvet pouch he had carried throughout the journey. Inside rested the moon crown Aurelia had returned 7 years earlier. "I brought this, hoping you'd wear it again." He looked down at the silver crown. "I understand now why you never could." He gently closed the pouch. "I'll take it home." "What will you do with it?" A quiet smile crossed his face. "I'll place it in the Hall of Kings, not as a symbol of the queen who left, but as a reminder of the woman who showed a king what leadership truly looks like." Aurelia's eyes shimmered with quiet emotion. "I think that's exactly where it belongs." As they returned toward the city gates, the bells of Ilarion began ringing. Volunteers paused their work. Children waved from the streets. Farmers removed their hats as Aurelia passed. No one bowed. No one knelt. Their love for her required no ceremony. At the city entrance, Lucian stopped. "I won't ask you to come home." Aurelia smiled. "I know. Because I finally understand." He looked once more at the city she had built. "You are home." She embraced him warmly. Not as husband and wife, not as king and former Luna, but as two people whose lives had forever changed one another. When Lucian mounted his horse the following morning, he did not look back with regret. He rode toward his kingdom, carrying something far more valuable than the woman he had once hoped to reclaim. He carried the wisdom she had given him. And for the first time in 7 years, the Alpha King smiled without sorrow. 5 years after Lucian returned from Ilarion, the continent looked nothing like it once had. The plague had become a chapter in history rather than a daily fear. Trade caravans once again crossed mountain passes. Ships filled the harbors. Children laughed in village squares, where quarantine banners had once hung. Yet the greatest change was not the return of prosperity. It was the way kingdoms now chose to lead. Every spring, Rulers from across the continent gathered in Ilarion, not to negotiate borders, not to threaten one another with armies, but to share harvest techniques, medical discoveries, irrigation plans, and new ways to care for their people. The old Continental War Council no longer existed. In its place stood the Council of Service. Its guiding principle was carved above the entrance hall. The strongest kingdom is the one that lifts another. No ruler claimed the idea. Everyone knew where it had begun. Lucian kept the promise he had made on the day he left Ilarion. He returned home, not to rebuild his reputation, to rebuild his kingdom. The first decree he signed had nothing to do with taxes or military strength. Instead, he created a ministry of public welfare, modeled after the quiet systems Aurelia had once managed alone. Every orphanage received permanent funding. Village healers reported directly to the crown instead of local nobles. Emergency grain reserves were established in every province. Scholarships were expanded so no child would lose an education because of poverty. When the royal council questioned the expense, Lucian gave the same answer every time. The cost of neglect is always greater. The old palace steward smiled each time he heard those words. Years earlier, Aurelia had once written the exact same sentence in one of her ledgers. Queen Seraphine also transformed. Never once did she try to imitate Aurelia. Instead, she embraced her own strengths. She expanded diplomatic academies, where young nobles learned negotiation before military strategy. Border disputes that once led to bloodshed were now settled around conference tables. When journalists praised her wisdom, Seraphine always corrected them. I was fortunate enough to witness two remarkable leaders. One taught me peace. The other taught me compassion. I've spent my life trying to honor both. Lucian admired her honesty. Over the years, they became trusted partners in governing, not because politics required it, because mutual respect had quietly replaced the awkward distance of their early years. Meanwhile, Ilarion continued growing. Its hospitals became the finest medical centers on the continent. Students traveled from distant kingdoms to study under its physicians. Farmers crossed oceans to learn sustainable cultivation methods. Engineers came to study its clean water systems. No visitor left without taking home more knowledge than they had brought. And every visitor noticed the same thing. Aurelia still began each morning in the children's hospital. She still carried food trays when volunteers were overwhelmed. She still greeted gardeners, cleaners, and apprentices by name. Nothing about success had changed her. It had simply allowed more people to experience the kindness she had always possessed. On the 10th anniversary of Ilarion's founding, leaders from every kingdom gathered once again. At the entrance to the sanctuary city stood a white marble monument covered by a silk banner. Thousands filled the surrounding gardens. Children sat beside kings, healers beside generals, farmers beside scholars. No seats were reserved according to rank, only according to need. Lucian stood quietly among the crowd. When Aurelia stepped forward to unveil the monument, complete silence settled across the city. She gently drew away the white cloth. Beneath it appeared a single inscription, carved into polished stone. A crown may grant authority. Only service earns trust. No applause came at first. Only thoughtful silence. Then, one by one, the gathered rulers began clapping. Not for the monument, not even for Aurelia, but for the truth those words represented. Lucian looked around at the transformed continent. Years ago, he believed losing Aurelia had marked the end of his greatest happiness. Standing in Ilarion now, he finally understood. Sometimes the people we lose do not leave to punish us. Sometimes they leave to become the light that guides the rest of the world. And if we are wise enough, we allow that light to change us too. 20 years later, Young Alpha heirs no longer began their education by studying famous battles. They began in Ilarion. Every future ruler spent one season serving inside its hospitals, kitchens, farms, and orphan homes before ever sitting upon a throne. Some cleaned patient rooms, others harvested vegetables. Many spent weeks reading stories to children who had lost everything. Only after learning to serve were they taught how to rule. It had become known simply as the Ilarion tradition. No king questioned it, because every king understood who had inspired it. On a bright spring morning, a group of young Alpha princes followed their instructors through the city's peaceful streets. One curious boy stopped before the white marble monument standing at the city's entrance. He slowly read the inscription aloud. "A crown may grant authority, only service earns trust." He looked toward his teacher. "Who wrote that?" Before the instructor could answer, another voice replied, "A woman who never needed a throne to become a queen." The boys turned. An elderly man stood nearby, wearing a simple gray traveling cloak. His silver hair caught the morning sunlight. Only the royal crest embroidered upon his sleeve revealed his identity. It was King Lucian. The students immediately bowed. Lucian smiled warmly. "You don't need to bow to me here." He gestured toward the bustling streets. "In Ilarion, we're all here to learn." The boys straightened. One finally gathered enough courage to ask, "Your Majesty, is it true you once ruled beside the White Queen?" Lucian nodded. "I did." "Were you the one who made her famous?" A gentle laugh escaped him. "No. I was the one who almost failed to recognize how extraordinary she already was." The boys exchanged curious glances. Lucian looked toward the children's hospital across the square. Aurelia, now older but no less graceful, knelt beside a frightened little girl, helping her bandage the paw of an injured wolf pup. There were physicians all around her, volunteers, teachers, yet she still chose to help with the smallest tasks herself. She had never stopped. "Look carefully," Lucian said. "What do you see?" One prince answered, "A queen." Another replied, "A healer." A third smiled, "Someone everyone trusts." Lucian nodded. "Exactly. Not because she demanded loyalty, but because she earned it every single day." As the students hurried away toward the hospital, Lucian remained standing before the monument. Aurelia noticed him and walked over, carrying 2 cups of warm herbal tea. "You still visit every spring." "I always will." She handed him one of the cups. "You've made quite a tradition." He smiled. "I learned from the best." For a while they stood together, watching children race through the gardens. No awkwardness remained, no lingering sorrow, only quiet gratitude. "You know," Lucian said at last, "for years I believed the greatest mistake of my life was losing you." Aurelia looked at him with gentle curiosity. "And now?" He smiled peacefully. "My greatest mistake was believing your worth depended on the crown I gave you." He looked around Ilarion. "The truth is, you carried your own crown long before either of us realized it." Aurelia laughed softly. "I think age has finally made you wise. It certainly took long enough." They shared a quiet smile. When the afternoon bells rang, visitors from every kingdom entered Ilarion. As always, before passing through the gates, every Alpha King paused. One after another, they removed their crowns. Not because Aurelia required it. She had never asked for such a gesture. They did it because crowns represented authority. Inside Ilarion, authority mattered less than humility. Respect mattered more than rank. Service mattered more than power. History remembered countless Alpha Kings who conquered lands, won wars, and expanded empires. Yet before children learned any of their names, they learned hers. Aurelia of Ilarion, the Luna who walked away with nothing, the queen who built everything, the woman before whom every alpha king willingly lowered his crown, not because she ruled them, but because she had shown them that the highest form of leadership is not commanding others to follow. It is living a life so full of compassion that others choose to follow your example. And though Lucien had once believed he replaced his Luna, he spent the rest of his life telling every future ruler the truth. The greatest queen I ever knew walked away without a crown,